will follow
You promised the last time I saw you
Chair,
that you would get the money back for
I mean,
Canadians.
That's
what you said, and you are coming
Excuse
to
me,
me,
Mr. Chair, am I able to
Sorry, let me
respond
interrupt. We have
to
another
that
point of
witness's
order.
question?
Sorry, we have a point of order from Mr. Kuzmierczak. We have to attend. Go ahead, Mr.
Mr. Chair, I'm just
Kuzmierczak.
asking my colleagues to please respect, again, our interpreters and
Mr.
their health and
Kuzmierczak,
safety.
if you're going to, I've made it clear, and I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I've made it clear that if there's an issue with the interpreters, they will contact our clerk.
Okay.
I would ask you to please stop your interruptions.
It's not an interruption.
It
I'm
is,
actually
Mr.
looking
Kuzmierczak,
after the
and if you're going to
interpreters
continue
on
this,
committee. Mr.
time
Chair-
will be taken
Mr.
away from
Chair,
others.
if
I've
you
made
won't
my
look after
ruling
it,
very
I
clearly.
certainly will.
Mr. Kuzmierczak, please. I've stated before, and I've told one of your colleagues before this,
Okay.
if there's an issue, they will advise the clerk the proper way. They will not advise you. They will not advise your other members. They'll advise the clerk. So I ask you, please stop with such interruptions. Mrs. Kusi, Minister, I understand.
Can I respond at
Mrs.
all,
Kusi
ever,
and
here?
Minister, I understand what you're saying. If you please allow a question and an answer, you have 40 seconds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can you tell Canadians today, clearly, as you promised them the last time that we spoke in a committee environment, that you have recouped the $60+ million because, as the Auditor General indicated, it is a minimum of $60 million. You have recouped those funds for Canadians as you promised you would.
Mr. Speaker, there is an ongoing investigation. Any wrongdoing will be taken into account. I stand by my comments that the government will seek to recover taxpayers' money that was spent
That's a no, Mr. Chair.
inappropriately.
That's
We are
clearly a no.
waiting for the RCMB investigation to conclude.
That's a no.
Thank you
It's
very much,
not a no. That is, we are waiting for the RCMP investigation
Thank you, Minister.
to
We're going to go
conclude,
to
Mr.
Mr. Baines.
Chair.
I'm sure you'll have
Thank
an
you.
opportunity to answer during Mr. Baines' time. Go ahead, Mr. Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I want to give the minister an opportunity to finish her answer. If I know you were interrupted a number of times there, so feel free to please answer on the important work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Yes, I was interrupted a number of times, and I feel it was inappropriate as well. I'm here to answer questions in good faith, and I would appreciate being given the opportunity by colleagues across the House to provide the answers that I'm here to give. Now, there is an ongoing investigation by the RCMP. That investigation has not concluded. We, as a government, have stated that we will comply with the recommendations from the RCMP. We will also ensure that anybody who abused taxpayers' money will face consequences, and the government will seek to recover taxpayers' money that was spent inappropriately. That is our commitment, and certainly at Treasury Board, I take the purview and the prudent spending of our government extremely seriously, as my colleagues do at the Treasury Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and I really appreciate the work that you are doing, and I'm very encouraged by the spending review that you've administered. I look forward to the upcoming updates on this. And my first question, the 2024-25 main estimates signal a $2.3 billion reallocation of funding in your refocused government spending initiative. That's up from a $500 million reallocation in the previous fiscal year. So what impact do these massive funding reallocations have on the delivery of important services that Canadians rely on?
Unlike the goal is to ensure that vulnerable Canadians are able to have supports. And in Budget 2023, we made a commitment to refocus government spending to ensure not only prudent fiscal management of taxpayer dollars, but that we were able also to utilize that funding to provide supports for Canadians. The main estimates reported on the planned reallocations of over $10.5 billion over the next 3 years as a result of the Refocusing Government Spending Initiative was tabled in the main estimates at the end of February. And I will say that the Refocus Government Spending Initiative was one that all ministers participated in, looking at their portfolios to see how they can refocus both money spent on operating costs as well as grants and contributions towards the government's priorities. The Refocus Government Spending Initiative is an initiative that is a commitment to prudence while continuing to support Canadians by creating growth and opportunities for all. You saw that commitment in Budget 2024 with supports for affordable housing, for a national school food program, for dental care, as well as additional childcare through ECE supports. Those are the types of initiatives and social programs that we believe are important. And if the opposition cares about poverty, then I would think they would support initiatives like a national school food program, like the Canada Child Benefit, and like $10 a day childcare, which ensures that families have support to get by.
Thank you. And with respect to that, are there any negative impacts on Canadian taxpayers maybe could face due to the refocused spending? And should parliamentarians choose to vote against these important main estimates?
As I said, Mr. Chair, the Refocus Government Spending Initiative does not cut the supports for Canadians. In fact, what it does is to take a look across government at spending where spending might not be necessary, such as in the area of executive travel and third-party contracting, to say this money could be better spent, is able to gain greater utility when used for another purpose. That is the way in which we are using this exercise, and I will say the PBO officer commenting on the first phase of refocusing government spending opined that government services would not be cut as a result of those measures.
I'm going to shift a little bit of focus because I think the threat is real around cybersecurity, and I think we all know that, and the ever-evolving threat of cyber attacks. In fact, in my city of Richmond, BC, London Drugs is headquartered there, and they recently faced a major cyber attack. And I wanted to ask a little bit about that strategy, the cybersecurity strategy, and how you're working to ensure that the Government of Canada's enterprise networks are safe.
So cyber is an area that I take very seriously, especially given my time at the Department of National Defence, where I had oversight of the communications security establishment. I will say that the Treasury Board has a leadership role in setting the direction for government IT modernization and driving momentum on the whole of government solution for cyber. Last week, I actually announced the first ever Government of Canada cyber strategy for our government. So rather than having individual departments and ministries utilize their own cyber strategy, we have now a whole of government approach that will be run out of the Treasury Board and Shared Services Canada together with the CSE. We are implementing
Sorry,
this.
Minister, we're out. Perhaps next round you
Sure.
can finish
Thank
off
you so
or
much.
get back
Thank
to
you
us
for the
writing.
question.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 6.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor. Madam Minister, you are the President of the Treasury Board, and the Treasury Board Secretariat is responsible for the Official Languages Act, services in French, and I thank you for that. Some public servants have some difficulty in using their mother tongue, and they may even answer in certain situations where there is interpretation, give answers in French to Anglophones. That is wonderful. But we see that there's a certain amount of slowness in the regulations. The Commissioner of Official Languages brought this to our attention. So when can we expect to have publication of the regulations? Thank you very much, Chair. Madam, for this question. I would start by saying that it is important, if not crucial, to have an environment where we can work in both official languages. It is certainly crucial for me as a minister to be able to do so throughout the country. In all the departments, everybody should be able to work in either or both official languages. You asked when. When are we going to have this framework available for the public service? It is important. We are going to have an announcement on that matter, and I will be sharing that announcement with you in coming weeks. Secondly, we are also going to provide a training, to publish a training guide in the coming months as well. Well, thank you very much. Spring will end on June 21st. So next month, it will be next month, around that date. Okay, just at the end of the spring. I took a look at the main estimates, and I saw for Treasury Board Secretariat that it has moved from 44 million to 50 billion in 2024-2025. Well, that's more than a giant step. You could. It seems to me that you are jumping the Atlantic and the Pacific with this huge increase. So, what is behind that request for this increase? First of all, Chair, I would like to perhaps clarify that it's a matter of continuing to support the most vulnerable in our society and to have essential programs like dental care and pharma care. But it is also a matter of providing affordable housing. With that, I would like to invite my colleague here if she would like to add something to your answer. Thank you. Yes, are you talking about the 5.1 billion central funds? Well, these are core funding. So there are always changes year over year. I don't know if you're comparing the same things with respect to the previous years. Well, last year it was $3.4 billion, and now it has taken this huge jump. If I make a comparison with 2022, 2023, where it was a matter of $44 million. Excuse me, I must say, and I apologize to the interpreters. I'm just flabbergasted by this enormous increase for the Treasury Board Secretariat. For overview, 44 million in 2022, 2023. But so we're talking, we're moving from 44 million to more than 2 billion. And now this year it's 5 billion. So how can you justify? What type of oversight is necessary to justify this type of jump? I'm going to have to come back to you with a written response. These are core funding numbers. But I think it would be more appropriate for me to answer in writing.
10 seconds.
Je reviendrai.
All right, then I will come back. And again, I thank you for giving me time, despite Mr. Bacharach.
Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. Not long after you were given this new role, you sent a letter to your ministerial colleagues asking them to identify areas to cut within their respective departmental budgets in an effort, and I'm reading from a Global News article, in an effort to reduce spending by $14.1 billion between now and 2028. Why $14.1 billion? It's a very specific number. What's it based on?
This was the first ever Refocus Government Spending Initiative that our government has done since 2015. And we wanted to be prudent, as other G7 economies are, with an exercise of this nature. We wanted to differentiate ourselves from the Harper DRAP program, which was much more severe and involved serious cuts to services and programs and the public service. And so we chose a prudent amount to begin the first phase of the Refocus Government Spending Initiative. But it's not just $15.8 billion. It is also that amount over a 5-year period, and then $4.8 billion every year thereafter. So it's actually a continuous process of ensuring that we are reducing our spending in some areas and refocusing it on others. And then finally, there's a phase 2 of the Refocusing Government Spending Initiative that was enunciated in Budget 2024.
So I appreciate all that, Minister, and I think you've laid out your rationale for it, but you didn't answer the question. The number in this article is 14.1 billion. The number you gave is 15.8 billion. They're both very specific numbers, and I'm wondering what they're based on. Like, arguably, you could provide the direction to find cost savings, and this assumes that there's some sort of slop in departmental budgets. I don't think anyone would argue that there isn't. But why specific numbers? 14.1 billion, 15.8 billion. What is that based on? Is it based on some kind of preliminary evaluation? This is out of honest curiosity.
I will say that we needed to begin with a baseline for an initiative that our government had not undertaken at that time. And Annie va ajouter quelque chose aussi.
So based on the budget announcement, it was based on discretionary spending. So it was 3% for operating discretionary spending and 15% for professional services and travel. So if you take those two percentages, you apply to the main estimates, you're going to get those specific numbers that you just referred to.
Okay. Thank you. That's a very clear answer, and I would encourage you to pass on your answering ability to the minister that we had prior, because he seemed to really struggle with answering simple questions that obviously have answers, and I appreciate that. Now, the CBSA border officers voted 96% in favor of a strike. They've been without a contract for 2 years. They provide really important services, as everyone around the table knows. And after the strike vote, the Canadian government said in a statement that a strike was unnecessary, but they also said that the government was ready to return to the table, quote, at any time. I guess the question is, has negotiating resumed, and why did it take a strike vote for the government to offer to return to the table?
Actually, we have already reached collective agreements with 80% of public servants comprising 17 bargaining units. And so we look forward to being at the table with the CBSA at the beginning of next week, actually. There's an independent mediator that will be overseeing the negotiations. There is the Public Interest Commission report, which is available publicly now, and it contains independent recommendations from that mediator, and those will form the basis of the negotiations that we will undertake at the table with these very important public servants. You'll recall the essential work that the border folks do, the CBSA folks do, and we're very grateful for that work, I will say. 90% of CBSA employees are performing essential services for Canadians. So we want to reach a deal that is fair for employees and fair for Canadian taxpayers, and we will look forward to doing that at the bargaining table.
Thank you, Minister. My last question, I know there's a lot of concern and interest in the return to work directive that your government has provided to public sector workers. And I think, you know, one of the curious things about this is what the core rationale for that directive is. We see that most of the departmental reports have indicated that productivity has either gone up or at least remained level for public sector workers working at home. What was the core rationale for providing that directive?
Just a quick answer, please.
The decision of the public service that was made relating to hybrid was made as a result of its view that it is fully within their ability to do that under existing policy without being a breach of collective agreement, because this stands outside of the collective agreement. In terms of an explanation of the policy, because it was not a political decision, I will turn to the public servants to
Actually,
answer that question.
I'm afraid we're out of time. We can either follow it up on Monday when the officials are back with us, or unless the minister wishes to stay past her hour.
It's very kind
Mrs.
of you,
Kusi,
Mr.
go
Chair.
ahead,
I will
please.
defer to the officials on Monday.
Mrs. Kusi for 5, please.
Minister, the CBSA border officers voted last week to approve a strike due to the lack of a contract for the last 2 years. Their demands include wage parity, protection from management retaliation, access to telework, and protection from CBSA's obsessive reliance on contracting out, very similar to your own government and your own department, Minister. Now, you have outlined briefly the process which you are undertaking. But if you are not successful, as your predecessor was not successful, and in fact, I think her legacy, unfortunately, is built on that lack of success in reaching these negotiations in a reasonable amount of time successfully. If you are not successful, can you share with Canadians the total amount that this will have an effect on the economy? How many in the billions will this affect the Canadian economy if you are not successful? Can you tell Canadians that, please?
Actually, it is premature for us to put precise figures on the table. We are still in the midst of ensuring that we reach a fair and reasonable agreement with the CBSA. We are committed to working with bargaining agents to reach an agreement that is fair and reasonable, and we will do so at the table. And I would be more than happy to return to this committee and speak to the particular numbers, but at this time it is premature for me to put numbers on the table in the type of question that I've just received.
I don't think it is premature, Minister, because if we look at the costs of the port strikes in both Vancouver and Montreal last year, it was $10 billion. $10 billion that had the effect on this economy, especially at a time when your government is in out of control spending, when we need this economy to function so bad. Your government failed, your predecessor failed in getting these negotiations resolved in a timely manner, which cost the economy $10 billion, and of course was also a hit to our tax revenues. So are you not concerned that we might see these numbers again? Should you not be successful? Do you have any comments for Canadians regarding that?
Of course, I have comments about our expenditures. I am the president of the Treasury Board, after all, and I will say that I will at all times have oversight and prudent oversight of government spending. What I mean by ensuring that we have a negotiation that occurs at the table is just that. The demands that are going to be the subject of those negotiations will yield, if all goes well, a fair and reasonable
Minister, I don't want to talk about
agreement
hypotheticals,
for
please,
the border services
I wouldn't be so
workers.
excited to share your title with a $39.8 billion deficit, Minister. I also want to ask as well, relative that you've stated that your department is happy to return to the bargaining table to negotiate in good faith.
Yes, we are.
But it's been 2 years without a contract, so why are you only just trying now to complete this negotiation? Like I said, your predecessor failed. You're in the process of failing. What are you going to do to ensure that you get this across
I
the finish
actually
line?
do not think that we are in the process of failing. we are in the process of seeking a deal that is fair and reasonable to Government of Canada employees and to the Canadian taxpayers. And I would not think that hypotheticals of the sort that are being posed in this question would be useful in seeking to reach a fair and reasonable deal. And
Well,
I will
as the
also
official
say,
opposition, Madam President, we look at results. Now, in August
And
2023, you
hypotheticals.
were excited to announce that you were going to find $50.4 billion in savings across all government departments over the next 5 years. However, in Budget 2024, more than $52.9 billion in new spending over the next 5 years was announced. This new spending is now more than 3.5 times as much as you announced in savings in August. So how has this initiative done anything to show fiscal restraint with you, as you have said, the president of the Treasury Board, as with you being that, and prove to Canadians that your government can responsibly handle money?
well, I would take a look at the external markers that indicate fiscal prudence, Mr. Chair. A AAA credit rating is actually an independent assessment
Minister, these are cold comfort. This is
Mr.
cold
Chair,
comfort
am
for
I going to be
Canadians.
able to
And
respond to these questions?
If you will not
Mr.
listen to
Chair?
the Prime Minister's office regarding your leadership campaign, I hope you will at least listen to Canadians. Thank you very much.
I would really like to be able to respond to questions,
think-
Mr. Chair. It's
Yeah, no,
very
I appreciate that. I think it'll
unprofessional
be-
to interrupt me when I'm actually just trying to
We-
respond.
We're out of time, unfortunately. But luckily, unfortunately, the next up is Mr. Jouari from the
Unbelievable.
Liberals, and I think perhaps you'll have an opportunity to respond. I assume during his time. Mr. Jouari, go ahead,
Thank
sir.
you, Mr. Chair. Madam Minister, officials, welcome to the committee. And Madam Minister, please take as much time as you want to be able to respond. I think it is important, and I have questions around the same line of holding the government accountable, but I'm sure we'll notice a different tone. We can
go
ask
ahead.
tough questions in a very respectable way, and I ask my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Minister. Go ahead. Floor is yours.
I simply wanted to respond by saying that independent credit rating agencies like Standard & Poor's, for example, have consistently rated our economy and our government's work on the economy with a AAA credit rating. It is not a nothing. It is actually an assessment of the fiscal health of our economy. And so to denigrate the work of those third-party analysts of our economy is simply to misunderstand the importance of that credit rating. And I will further say that those are economic markers that indicate the fiscal health of a country. At the same time, what we as a government have chosen to do is actually to respond to poverty, is actually to respond to homelessness, is actually to respond to the need in educational institutions to support researchers, master's and doctoral students with supports to feed the pipeline of brilliance, of the AI economy, of the digital economy. And so there's a clear choice that is being made here between the plan of our government in Budget 2024 and the absence of a plan by the opposition, where they simply criticize with no actual alternative on the table.
Thank you for that clarification. So now, Madam Minister, in Budget 2024-2025 main estimate for the TBS, I saw that you're asking $9.3 billion in voted expenditure. And when I did a little bit of digging, I realized that's the fifth highest of any federal department. Can you please share the rationale behind this high degree of spending in your department? And if you can explain what initiatives actually these spending are being focused on and what. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. These are values that we care deeply about, in particular, creating a diverse and equitable and accessible and inclusive workforce. I'll highlight the action plan for Black public servants that I announced in February, which provides mental health supports for Black public servants, as well as supports for career development, especially at the Canadian School of Public Service. In addition, supporting health and safety through the Public Service Healthcare Plan, strengthening and modernizing the public service through HR to Pay and enhancing the work environment, and reinforcing the values and ethics of the public service, which are also goals of our government and implemented by Treasury Board. I will also say, comme j'ai déjà mentionné, que nous
As I have said already, that we continue to promote and protect both official languages.
good faith. As I said, we've already reached collective agreements with 17 bargaining units representing 80% of public servants, and we will look forward to doing so with the remainder because it is important to negotiate in good faith at the bargaining table. Thank you.
Focus spending increase now to some refocus government or cost saving, as I would call it. Madam Minister, in your opening remarks, or in responses, you talked about the phase 1 and phase 2. And with 30 seconds of my time left, can you talk about the priority areas for the second phase of the free focus government spending that you'll be focusing on? Thank you.
It's like 20 seconds left now.
So the methodology is currently being undertaken. I will say that we had cooperation and participation by all ministers. The initiative was about examining our budgets, and we have to find means to strengthen our spending on priorities, and reallocation of funds from other areas is absolutely necessary. Also, it's not about cutting services that Canadians rely on. We need to ensure that we support the priorities that I've outlined already today. We are examining phase 2, and we will share more details in the future.
Thanks very much, Mrs. Vignola. Then Mr. Bachrach. I have to keep exactly to the 2.5, 2.5, 5, and 5 in order to get the minister out at a decent time. Please go ahead, Mrs. Vignola.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. I'm going to ask you a question about the passage of Bill C-290 to protect people who disclose misdeeds. So I'm going back to this issue. And there's a budget that was attached to a working party, a working group. It was set up in 2022, was it not? And if I am correct, what is the result? Is that budget sufficient? And what are the expenditures attached to this working group? Chair, I would like to have more details about this particular group, this whistleblowers group, and perhaps what group is my colleague referring to? In the 2024-25 Treasury Board Secretariat says it will continue to support the working group of people who are public servants and who are whistleblowers. This group has been set up, I believe, in 2022, if I am correct. What has the group been doing? What have they been charged with? Thank you for the question. That was before that I became minister. Could I look into it and give you the answer in writing after the fact? I will do so in writing because I have to look into the situation with that group. But I would also like to say
to whistleblower protections. We did support the private members bill of the bloc when it came forward. And so I'll just say as a general matter that I'm very supportive of the issue, but on the specific question and the group's activities, I will come back to you with the expenditures as well.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur le
Thank you so much, Chair. Do I still have a few instants left?
Boudreau is back with us Monday. Perhaps she can present us with that information on Monday. Please be quick, Mrs. Vignola. Sorry.
Merci beaucoup. Selon le plan,
Thank you. With respect to 2024-2025's budget, the Treasury Board Secretariat has 90% of its high volume work that has been able to demonstrate service standards. So what are service standards? It seems to me that service standards, when you set them out, they should be followed implicitly without any exception entirely. So with this amount that of the volume that has been attained, fine, but why is it not 100%? Can you give me the answer in writing as well, please?
Or perhaps on Monday. Mr. Bachrach, please go ahead, sir.
Minister, I think a lot of Canadians were pretty shocked to discover that this individual, David Yeo, was working for the federal government, for DND, while at the same time securing millions of dollars in government contracts. And Treasury Board has promised a new risk framework to ensure that departments are managing themselves accordingly and avoiding situations like this where no conflict of interest disclosure was provided and it wasn't flagged by the department or dealt with properly. Can you talk a little bit about how this new risk framework, if it had been in place, would have caught this situation and dealt with it appropriately?
So actually today I published a new manager's guide, and this is building on the announcement that Jean-Yves Duclos and I made on March 20th. And that new manager's guide makes it mandatory for managers that they've looked at all alternatives within the public service. And also there's a requirement to disclose conflicts of interest before a contract is signed. The manager has to attest that no conflict exists. And so essentially, that is the difference. There's the requirement to do so in writing, and it has to be done at the time of contracting. But you will recall that with regard to the individual that you mentioned, that disclosure was made and caught.
The disclosure was made, but I think it took like 150 days after he was hired by the department, when the requirement, the department's own requirement, is that it be disclosed, I believe, within 30 days. Is that not the case?
As soon as it was caught, the individual was terminated. I was not actually at Defense at the time, but I know Francis is conducting the horizontal audit across government, so he will be able to speak as the Comptroller General more specifically to that case.
Very, very, very briefly, please.
So the requirement as it relates to contracting with the Government of Canada when you are an employee requires that the actual authority be given by the Deputy Minister prior to the actual work, the actual work to be conducted. So it's not a 30 days after, it's actually a requirement prior to it.
Under the new rules, correct?
Under the current rules.
Thanks very much. Mr. Genuis, please go ahead, sir.
Minister, you oversee government spending and related rules. Can you assure this committee that you've never used government resources as part of a leadership campaign?
I most definitely can confirm that I have never done that and would never do that. And I actually am surprised that you would ask the question, but I have never done that.
Thank you, Minister. I think people understand that it's an important question. Have any directives been issued to ensure that other ministers are following the rules as well?
Ministers and public servants are expected to follow all rules, period.
But no directives have been issued specifically on that?
it is important for everyone to follow the policies of the Government of Canada, as well as the conflict of interest policies that all MPs are required to follow.
Thank you, Minister. I think that's clear on the record in terms of what was asked and what was answered. You know, we're here reviewing Indigenous contracting as well. Documents have been received that reveal that a small number of nominally Indigenous firms were able to act as brokers between the federal government and other potentially non-Indigenous companies, simply getting contracts and subcontracting. This allows the contracts to fit into an Indigenous contracting quota, even though Indigenous people do not actually benefit because the subcontractors may be all or mostly non-Indigenous. These companies are essentially using the Dalian or GC Strategies model. I want to ask you, when a company gets a contract under an Indigenous set-aside, is there an expectation or a requirement that some percentage of subcontracts also go to Indigenous firms?
Indigenous Services Canada manages the list of Indigenous businesses that are qualified Indigenous contracting companies, but PSPC manages this overall, and I will say that departments are responsible for making a request to IST to conduct a post-award audit, and the audit has to be requested when there's any suspicion at all that the requirements of the applicable policy haven't been met through delivery, and Indigenous Services Canada.
Can I just clarify my question, Minister, and I'd love to hear your response on this. Do the requirements include that a certain percentage of subcontracts from an Indigenous contracting situation, that a certain percentage of the subcontracts go to Indigenous companies? And are the subcontractors tracked in any way?
Right now, the percentage is 33%. In other words, the contractor's delivery of goods or services and monitoring the contractor's compliance with the 33% Indigenous content requirement for contracting companies.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was looking for, and I appreciate that, the 1/3 requirement there. Is that tracked? Because the committee asked for subcontracting information, and we received, in almost all cases, zero information about subcontracts. So I'm a bit mystified about how the government would know if that requirement is being met, if subcontracting is not being tracked in any case.
I actually just want to clarify my answer, and then I want to add one thing. It's 33% for the contract. That would be verified in the post audit that ISC does. And on your question about subcontractors, I actually think it is a good point, and I think that we should do continual work to be able to track the suppliers in the subcontracting process.
Yeah, Minister, I really appreciate that comment. That's the first time I've ever questioned a minister and had an acknowledgement of an important point, because I think there is a gap. We received no information on subcontracts. We didn't get an answer from the previous minister. So I hope we'll have agreement from this committee, from you, to refine that process so we're actually tracking subcontracting information. I want to ask one more question on this. There seem to be instances where a few small number of companies are getting an outsized proportion of overall contracts. How much would you say is too much for a single company to get of that total share of Indigenous procurement? Keeping in mind that there's over 600 Indigenous communities in this country, how much would be too much for a single company to get of that total?
I do not have the ability to respond to that question without an overall amount of the actual contract. But I will say that the principle that we operate under is fair, open, and transparent competition. And the 5% floor for Indigenous contracts that we established as a government was meant to ensure that Indigenous suppliers have access to government contracts.
Thank you very much. Ms. Atwin, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to address really quickly, I see that Mr. Generous is particularly interested in the Indigenous business procurement strategy, which is great, but I would caution you to be really careful with the language that you're using. Nominally Indigenous, I'm not sure where you're going with that. I think Indigenous identity is very complex, and I would just caution you to be careful around that discussion. Minister, systemic racism, bias, and discrimination are issues that everyone has a responsibility to resolve. Across Canada, there's still numerous barriers to entry, retention, or promotion for marginalized groups in places of employment, and statistically speaking, it disproportionately impacts Black Canadians. How is the Treasury Board working to address systemic racism and discrimination in the ranks of the public service? And what benefit does the funding offer to the department in the main estimates offer to the broader public service as well as the department itself?
I have been very pleased that at the Treasury Board of Canada, there is a responsibility to ensure that we're addressing discrimination in the public service. Discrimination is a reality, and we need to do more, and we need to do more faster. So I appreciate the question, and it is a priority that I am taking extremely seriously. We have a restorative engagement program that we are responding to in terms of recommendations that we received from an expert panel. And in fact, I'm building on my work at the Department of National Defense, where we also had a restorative engagement program there. And so part of that is going to ensure that we do whatever possible to address discrimination in the public service. In addition to the restorative engagement program, we have the supports for Black public servants that we have announced in February, including supports for mental health of Black public servants by ensuring that we have Black counselors who are able to assist where needed. And in addition to that, we have the School of Public Service, where we are ensuring that there are professional development and career supports for Black public servants. And I'll say that when I announced those supports for Black public servants, one of our Black public servants in the Government of Canada came to me and said, "My son has now said that he can see himself working in the Government of Canada." And I will say that there's way more work to do, but it does give you hope that things can get better when you hear comments like that.
Indeed, for sure. Thank you, Minister. I want to ask now about HR and pay systems of the public service. As we all know, there's been much controversy surrounding the Phoenix pay system and the various issues that our public servants face through its implementation. It certainly affected many of my constituents. I'm in the capital city of New Brunswick, many federal departments, CFB Gagetown as well. And so could you discuss how your department is working to ensure that Canada's public service receives adequate pay services, as well as any new measures that are being taken regarding the public services human resources system?
Sure. I am definitely committed to making sure that federal public servants are paid properly and on time for their work. And it is something that I have been focused on since my days at Public Services and Procurement Canada. The government and a number of public service unions have reached agreements to compensate current and former employees who were affected by the implementation of the Phoenix pay system in 2016. Those agreements cover general damages from April 2016 to March 2020. All employees covered by the damages agreements have now received their general damages compensation. Also, there is a claims process in place to allow eligible current and former employees to file claims where there are severe damages. I will say that there continue to be issues that the government needs to address. We need to resolve outstanding pay issues for public servants. We need to modernize the processes and systems to improve the overall human resources and pay experience for employees, and we will always work with all partners, including bargaining agents, to simplify human resources and pay processes.
Excellent, thank you.
You have enough time to say thanks, basically.
Oh, okay, well, thank you very much, Minister.
And that's all the time I have as well. Minister, witnesses, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
We're going to suspend for about 5 minutes or so to set up our next round of witnesses. We are suspended. We are back in session. We'd like to welcome friends from Canada Post, Mr. Edinger. Welcome to OGGO. Appreciate you joining us. We'll turn the floor over to you for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, and good evening, Mr. Chair. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Manon Fortin, our Chief Operating Officer, on my left, and Randella El-Haj, our Vice President of Finance and our Controller, on my right. Thank you so much for having us today, and thank you to the committee for undertaking this very timely study on the Postal Service in Canada's rural and remote communities. Le travail que vous faites.
The work that you do is very important.
Look very much forward to this report. Like so many other businesses, Canada Post must adapt to the dramatic changes in how Canadians live and work and shop, in our case. Our recently released annual report makes it crystal clear that the Postal Service is facing major challenges financially and operationally. My focus is on how we can best meet the needs and expectations of Canadians both now and into the future, with a focus on them, our customers. Canada Post provides a service and a network that Canadians consider essential. We connect all 17.4 million addresses daily in the second largest country in the world. We connect our country and our economy. Canadians depend on us because we deliver everywhere, not just where it would be most profitable for us. Our service can be a lifeline for many Canadians, and for small businesses, it allows them to compete in a market dominated by large multinational e-commerce giants. And for Canadians in rural and remote areas, Canada Post is one of their only delivery options. As the postal system changes, these rural and remote communities cannot get left behind. Nous devons et nous...
We must and we want to be there for them.
By now, you've seen, and we've seen our financial results, so I won't get into all the details. But let me highlight a few of our challenges. Firstly, on letter mail, which used to be our primary revenue source, continues to decline as it does around the world in this advancing digital age. In 2006, each household received an average of 7 letters a week. Last year, it was just 2. At the same time, and going in the opposite direction, a growing population means we deliver to more addresses every year. In fact, 3 million more compared to 2006. More addresses means our delivery costs continue to rise, and year after year, the financial gap between the price of postage and the cost of providing the service widens. We've also seen challenges in parcel delivery. The parcels are the very future of the company, where we've been making critical investments in service and capacity to better compete. Last year, these investments helped us achieve some of our best ever service performance results in our entire history. However, the parcel delivery market has become hyper-competitive. We're going head-to-head, toe-to-toe against established global players and low-cost new entrants that emerged through the pandemic. As a result, our parcel delivery market share has been cut by more than half since 2019. Mr. Chair, Canadians need a strong postal service, particularly in rural and remote communities. Nous adapter.
We must adapt quickly to be there for them.
For this important study, let me offer my thoughts on what a future Canada Post could look like. To me, it requires the following. Number one, becoming much more nimble and innovative, focused on the changing needs of our customers. Number two, being able to invest in priority areas such as our network and bringing our legacy systems out of the dark ages. Further improving safety for our people and continuing to green our operations. Number 3, having a delivery model with the flexibility to offer weekend deliveries, next-day deliveries, and other innovative services Canadians want. Number 4, making our post office network more small business friendly and an easy-to-access growth hub for Canada's budding entrepreneurs. And lastly, number 5, we need a refreshed regulatory approach, one that provides flexibility to act quickly in today's hyper-competitive parcel market, while providing the appropriate checks and balances in terms of government oversight.
That is my vision for modernizing Canada Post.
Canada Post will continue to be there for all Canadians and Canadian businesses. We will keep working hard to evolve the postal system to reflect how Canadians use our service today, and more importantly, how they're going to use it tomorrow. Significant change is required urgently, and we're prepared and committed to leading this change, working closely with the federal government and our bargaining agents. Canadians expect us to work together in your roles as legislators and ours as management to find workable solutions to evolve and preserve this great national infrastructure. I look forward to our discussion. Thank you and merci.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Mrs. Block, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Ettinger. Welcome here. I think this is our second or third meeting on this study regarding Canada Post, and I'm looking forward to hearing your answers. Sir, can you answer for us what has been the biggest obstacle to Canada Post modernizing over the last 8 years?
Thank you for that question. I appreciate that. Really, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, our costs, our delivery costs have been going up substantially, and addresses have been added as we've been growing as a country. So the costs in that are very significant because, as you know, we deliver to every address every day. We're proud of that. We're pleased to do that. But the cost of being everywhere every day is getting higher and higher every day. At the same time, our revenues have been falling in terms of letter mail, our most profitable line of business. So it's put us in a tough position financially in terms of having, adequate funding over the long term to make the kind of changes we need to make to modernize this company. It needs to be modernized. It needs to be more agile. It needs to be more flexible. And when I say flexibility, I mean regulatory, but also in areas of investment, decision-making. We're in a category against some of the best competitors in the world, and we have to be moving fast. I'm confident we can compete with them, but it needs to be a different model to do that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. In your opening statements, you used terms like being able to invest and a refreshed regulatory approach. We've been made aware that Canada Post has not had a corporate plan approved since 2019, which is prior to the pandemic. How much damage has been done to Canada Post by the lack of a corporate plan over the last 5 years?
Well, we thank you for that. We've been working very closely with the government on the plan. Our last corporate plan was submitted last fall, in fact, early, for 24 to 28, the corporate plan. It outlines the challenges in that in great detail. We've not been able to find alignment to get approval, but we're working with the government on a new plan. We're joint stewards of Canada Post. We're working together to try to find the right solutions. The minister and I have a good working relationship. But right now, the focus is on short-term measures to make sure that we continue to be viable in the next few years in terms of financing, borrowing, and pricing flexibility so that we have the adequate amount of funds to continue to turn around this company.
So with this misalignment that you have between Canada Post and the Government of Canada or the minister with whom you are negotiating to get an approved plan, what seems to be the issue, the main issue in that misalignment?
Well, as you know, in the laws that govern Canada Post, we have to operate in a financially self-sustainable manner, which is a good thing to have in place. So we have submitted all of our plans from a business standpoint based on the need to have a long-term financially sustainable company, breaking even or even getting past that, but mainly to break even. But we have not found in that process the alignment that both of us are comfortable with. So again, we're continuing to work hard on it, and in the meantime, we're changing and upgrading and modernizing what's within our control.
Thank you. I represent a very large rural riding in Saskatchewan, and my constituents on a repeated basis have raised the issue of Canada Post's long-term effort to change over addresses to civic addresses for the purposes of delivering the mail. And I know that this is being replicated across the country in rural Canada. Do you have a timeline for when this initiative will be completed? And can you tell us what are the difficulties facing Canada Post in getting this done?
Thank you. And I'm going to pass that over to Manon Fortin, our Chief Operating Officer, to answer that question, if I can.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Doug, and thank you for the question. We are constantly reviewing our network to assess where changes need to be made to improve service to the 17 million addresses, not just urban, but rural and remote communities also. And we have hundreds of civic addressing projects ongoing every year. I'm not familiar with the requests from your area, but I can assure you that we often do it at the request of the community, or we do it because there's growth that we need to deal with, and therefore, or changing demographics, changes in the community. So hundreds of it's not an easy change. It takes a lot of diligence and a lot of work with those who live in the community and the cities as well. So I'd be
very
happy
much. I'm afraid that is
to
our
get
time.
more information.
Sure.
Yeah, and to provide a clear answer on your area specifically.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Kusmirchuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for being here today at OGGO, and thank you very much for bringing your insights to the work of this committee. I just wanted to start off and saying thank you. This is the first time I had a chance to say thank you for the stamp that was introduced back in January during Black History Month for Marianne Shadd, who is a local icon in Windsor, Essex, and Chatham, Kent area. Marianne Shadd was an abolitionist and was the first woman and the first Black woman in Canada to publish a newspaper, the Provincial Freeman. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that wonderful initiative. Just curious, I wanted to ask what type of response have you received to that?
Well, thank you for raising that. I appreciate it. And you know, it's one of the really enjoyable parts of my job and our job is to tell the stories of Canadians, a lot of unknown and heroes, Canadian heroes that we don't know about. But that stamp went over very, very well. Part of our annual focus on Black History Month, and there's so many great stories there. And, you know, we really, we do a good job on those, and we really enjoy putting those stories out there and getting the families involved and the communities. It's great for Canada, and if you've never been to a stamp launch, you should come. They're quite emotional and quite positive. So, yeah, thank you for the comments.
Wonderful, Mr. Edinger, and you mentioned the word heroes, and I look at the 500 postal workers in Windsor as heroes.
Mm-hmm.
They're amazing, and especially during the pandemic, they answered the bell in a huge way. They continue to serve our community with distinction. just to highlight, 2 years ago, a former postal worker, Mr. Phil Lyons, received a prestigious award in our community, which is the Charles E. Brooks Labor Community Service Award, for being a community leader in Windsor, Essex, serving the community. And so they are heroes. Not only do they carry the mail and deliver the mail, not only do they support our community, homeowners, seniors, and others, but they make our communities better. They give back to our community. And, in Budget 2024, the federal government affirmed that Canada Post will continue to be a service-first organization. I just wanted to ask you, what does service-first mean to Canada Post?
Well, thank you for that question. And by the way, before I answer that directly, our employees are absolutely amazing. They are the ambassadors of our brand. They're everywhere, every day. We get tremendous positive feedback. Of course, not all of them are perfect, but they're pretty darn close to it. We really value what they bring to the table, and through COVID, they were amazing. They were on, just to remind everyone, they were on the front lines all through that. They never wavered from their responsibilities to be out there. It was amazing to watch. In terms of service, it's our number 1 through number 10 priority. It is everything to us. It's in law, it's in our mandate, it's in our blood, it's in our purpose, which is a stronger Canada delivered. And our recent investments, where we've tried to control things that are really important to us, we were pleased to open a brand new facility last year in Scarborough, the Albert Jackson Processing Center, named after our first black letter carrier in Canada back in the late 1800s. That was a huge project led by Manon Fortin, I might say, and led very well. And that is the hub of our e-commerce model across Canada. It is an amazing facility, and our service numbers have shot up quite amazingly since then. The transition, the stabilization has been incredible. Our on-time service performance numbers are the best we've ever